Senator Elizabeth Warren delivering a blistering speech attacking Donald Trump's war on the law. And for the first time on the Senate floor, she went there on impeachment.
If any other human being in this country had done what's documented in the Mueller report, they would be arrested and put in jail. This is not about politics. This is about the Constitution of the United States of America. We took an oath not to try to protect Donald Trump. We took an oath to protect and serve the Constitution of the United States of America. And the way we do that is we begin impeachment proceedings now against this president.
Pretty blunt. Warren saying impeachment proceedings should begin now. Speaker Pelosi, of course, has been very careful on impeachment, even saying today Trump is goading Democrats to impeach him. But she did leave the door open. She says the administration's outright refusal to comply with House subpoenas, quote, could be an impeachable offense. And 2020 candidate Senator Kamala Harris says Congress needs to make a decision on obstruction.
We are talking about such a fundamental issue, which is whether or not the President of the United States obstructed justice. I think it's something that we need to figure out, and Congress has a responsibility to look into it, and so I support the effort to actually begin the steps toward figuring out what happened.
So this is the political backdrop to the massive fight in Washington, and it comes with a rapidly growing list of former federal prosecutors, more than 700 now, saying Trump would be hit with multiple felony charges if he was not president. Look how quickly, just from yesterday morning to the afternoon to today, 700 plus. Back with me is a former federal prosecutor who signed that letter, Joyce Vance. Daniela Gibbs-Leger from the Center for American Progress, who also served in the Obama administration, and E.J. Dionne, columnist for the Washington Post. I don't know, E.J., does this feel, at least in some sense, like a turning point to you, the nervousness about impeachment over 2020 political concerns? But now the White House says no Mueller, no McGahn, no tax returns. Democrats obviously furious, prosecutors with that letter offering some legal cover. Do you sense we're moving any closer to impeachment here?
Yes, I mean, I agree completely with the premise of your question. I think 2 months ago, a lot of people, and I was one of them, said, you know, the country might be better off if Donald Trump were simply defeated at the polls by a huge margin, and then we could move on. Now, because the administration is turning down every single request Congress makes, whether it's for taxes, whether it's for Mueller's testimony, we'll see if they try to block it, or McGahn's testimony, or McGahn's documents. This is saying no to every form of accountability. It's more the behavior of a monarch or an authoritarian leader than a president. And I think you see in Pelosi's comment that you just reported that she, who has been very strongly of the view we're better off beating him at the polls, she wants him on the ticket with the Republicans, is now saying Congress can't just lie down and accept being treated this way, because it's not just about treating Congress, it's about fundamental accountability under the Constitution. So, yes, I think we're closer to impeachment today than we were even a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth remembering, Daniela, back in March when Nancy Pelosi kind of set the standard for impeachment. She said at the time, quote, impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path. But are we at that point?
You know, I think we're rapidly approaching it. There is some sort of irony in the fact that it is Donald Trump and his administration's behavior in the past couple of weeks that are pushing Democrats who were a little bit hesitant to say the I word, to say, look, we may have no choice but to impeach this president or to start an impeachment referral or start impeachment hearings because there is something called the rule of law. I know that Donald Trump seems to think that he's above the law and above the Constitution, but they can't just say no to everything that Congress legally has a right to see or ask for. So I do think that, as EJ said, we are much closer today towards at least beginning impeachment hearings or like more investigations than we were a couple of weeks ago.
Joyce, I want to play Neil Katyal. He's talking about the unprecedented nature of this 700-plus signature letter from former federal prosecutors, including you.
I mean, it's hugely significant. I've never seen anything quite like it. All of them saying, when we review this evidence, it's obstruction of justice. And if this were anyone else but a sitting president, this person would be labeled a felony and staring down and staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. And what you have in this letter is 370 prosecutors saying, we agree, the Mueller report shows the president is a felon.
Yeah, so again, 370 yesterday at this hour, now 700. So Joyce, summarize the case, because clearly this has momentum.
The striking thing about this letter is not that it was signed by political appointees, although there are some people like me who were U.S. attorneys on it. What's striking is it's signed by career people, by line prosecutors, by criminal chiefs who every day are charged with evaluating the evidence in a case and making a decision about whether to indict. And here, an extraordinarily large number of prosecutors has looked at the evidence laid out in the Mueller report and said, you know, I would indict this case. And that's an important decision, because these are people who, just by their training, by their practice, leave their politics at the door when they walk inside of their offices at the Justice Department and look just at the law and the facts. They're not saying that the president is guilty. They're saying that they believe that there is sufficient evidence to bring an indictment.
Were you surprised that it's gone up to 700? Because I was a little stunned when I heard the number.
I wasn't surprised at all. And in fact, I noticed that several of my predecessors in North Alabama are on the list, as are prosecutors from across the country, many of them people with 20, 30, even in a couple of cases, 40-plus years experience at DOJ. This is really a rising up of the career folks at the Justice Department in support of this proposition. I suspect that if people who were still working at DOJ had the ability to sign this, we would see significant numbers there as well.
Wow, a rising up. Well, Daniela, take a listen to 2020 Republican challenger, former Governor Bill Weld, who also signed this letter. Talk about impeachment.
I've been one who've been agreeing with Steny Hoyer and others that impeachment might not be a wise thing to do right now, because the president might, not get convicted because of not 67 votes in the Senate, and then he would declare victory just before the election. I don't know. This stuff is pretty tough.
So you are open to impeachment now?
Well, I think it needs a little rethinking in view of the brazenness of the response by both the president and my friend Bill Barr.
Danielle, expand a little bit on something we've touched on, which I think is a central question here now in Washington. This conflict between what on one side is a political imperative for people who believe the president committed crimes, as well as a constitutional imperative. But for Democrats who believe the path to victory is the issues, it's a different kind of calculus.
Yeah, in D.C., you can never separate the politics from anything. But, I would encourage, my Democratic friends to really think through what's at stake here. The American people deserve to have a full and open hearing and understanding of what is in this report. And I think once the American people fully understand everything that has happened, all the context, all the obstruction that is clearly laid out, that 700, DOJ, former DOJ and prosecutors have signed on and said they think is obstruction. Once the American people actually hear that and understand that, I think some of those political concerns may go by the wayside. But, at the end of the day, Democrats were elected to, be a check on Donald Trump. They won the House by record numbers because people wanted there to be a body that stood up to Donald Trump. And also, put forth policies that would make the American people's lives better. So I think that Democrats sometimes have to get out of their heads a little bit and understand what's really at stake. We are facing a constitutional crisis, and it's important for there to be an open hearing of everything that happened with the Mueller investigation.
I also found it really interesting earlier this week, EJ, when Nancy Pelosi was talking to the New York Times, and she suggested that she thinks Trump might try to contest the results of the 2020 election if it's a really close margin. Here's what she told them. If we win by 4 seats, by 1,000 votes each, he's not going to respect the election. He would poison the public mind. He would challenge each of the races. He would say, you can't seat these people. What do you make of that?
Well, I agree with her. In fact, Trump said the other day that he's lost 2 years, so he's owed 2 years more. So I don't think that's, I think Pelosi is onto something.
He was robbed, EJ. He was robbed.
I'm sorry, right, exactly. And that I think that, in any event, in order to govern ourselves, the margin has to be big so everybody in the country can say, we're done with this. I think with Pelosi on impeachment, the refusal to let witnesses appear, the refusal to hand over documents has kind of wrecked the strategy she had in mind. What she had in mind is we won't impeach, but we will have hearings. We're going to instruct the public on what is in the Mueller report and let them decide. And then and only then will we face the impeachment question. But with Trump, with his sense of television, he knows that this television show would not be good for him. So he's trying to block all the characters from appearing on the show. And that's why I think she has to reconsider the strategy that she would prefer, but may not have available to her.
Yeah, she keeps it in the back of her head. She keeps thinking he's goading us. He's goading us. We shouldn't play into it. Tough times, but also important ones for the decision makers. EJ, always great to see you. Daniela, Joyce, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.